August 1944. The city of Paris sits under a strange, electric silence, the kind that settles just before something enormous breaks. 4 years of German occupation have left their mark on every cobblestone, every shuttered cafe window, every face that dares to look up at the sky. And somewhere in that sky, the Allies are coming. But there's a problem, and it has nothing to do with the Germans. The man standing between the American army and the liberation of Paris is not a Nazi general, he is a French one. His name is Charles de Gaulle, and the decision he is fighting to make a decision about who enters Paris first, who gets credit, who shapes the political future of France, will put him on a direct collision course with one of the most volatile, brilliant, and difficult generals in American military history, George S. Patton. Here is the question that will pull us through this story. Why would an Allied general fight to keep Allied soldiers out of a city they were trying to liberate? And what exactly did Patton do about it? The answer involves military genius, political theater, wounded national pride, and one of the most audacious acts of insubordination or inspired improvisation, depending on who you ask, in the history of the Second World War. Let's go back to the beginning of August 1944. The Allied breakout from Normandy is already underway. Operation Cobra has punched a hole through the German lines, and Patton's Third Army is doing what Patton's army always did, moving fast, violently, with a kind of mechanical fury that left German commanders staring at maps in disbelief. Patton's soldiers are covering ground at a pace that defies conventional military logic. In some sectors, they're advancing 30-40 miles in a single day. His armor doesn't wait for flanks to be secured. It doesn't pause for supply lines to catch up. It moves, and it keeps moving, because Patton understood something that many generals of his era did not. Speed is armor. Hesitation kills more soldiers than bullets. But Paris is not on Patton's official list of objectives. Not yet, not according to the plan. Eisenhower's original strategy called for bypassing Paris entirely. The logic was cold and practical. Paris is a city of 2 million people. Feeding them, supplying them, keeping the lights on that would consume an estimated 4,000 tons of supplies per day. Supplies that Eisenhower desperately needed to keep his armies moving toward Germany. Liberating Paris, in the cold calculus of military logistics, was a liability. Eisenhower wanted to encircle the city, cut it off, and let it wither while the main Allied thrust pushed east. Paris would fall eventually, but the war would be won by getting to Berlin. This is where Charles de Gaulle enters the picture, and where the story gets complicated. De Gaulle is not simply a general, he is a symbol. He has spent 4 years building the Free French movement from essentially nothing, fighting not just the Germans, but the indifference of Churchill and the outright skepticism of Roosevelt, who considered him arrogant, unmanageable, and politically dangerous. Roosevelt preferred to deal with the Vichy government, the French officials who had collaborated with Nazi Germany, because at least they were predictable. De Gaulle is not predictable. He is a man of towering ambition and equally towering pride, and he understands something with crystalline clarity. Whoever liberates Paris controls the narrative of France's future. If American soldiers march down the Champs, Élysées first, France becomes a liberated country. If French soldiers march first, specifically the 2nd French Armored Division under General Philippe Leclerc, France becomes a country that liberated itself. The distinction is everything to de Gaulle. It is the difference between a nation that was rescued and a nation that rose. So de Gaulle does something remarkable. He essentially goes around Eisenhower. He pressures, lobbies, maneuvers. He makes clear that if the Allies don't send French troops into Paris, he will send Leclerc's division anyway, on his own authority, without Allied support. This is not a bluff. De Gaulle is absolutely capable of it. And then, on the 19th of August, 1944, the situation changes overnight. The Parisian police go on strike. The French resistance rises up inside the city. Barricades go up in the streets. Gunfire echoes through the arrondissements. Paris is in open revolt against its German occupiers, and the German garrison commander, General Dietrich von Choltitz, is sitting on a direct order from Adolf Hitler to burn the city to the ground rather than surrender it. Von Choltitz has not yet lit the match, but he might. Suddenly, Eisenhower's careful logistical calculations collapse. He cannot let Paris burn. He cannot let a popular uprising be crushed while Allied armies sit 40 miles away. The political cost would be catastrophic. On August 22nd, Eisenhower reverses course. Paris will be liberated, and in a concession to de Gaulle's relentless pressure, the 2nd French Armored Division will lead the entry. Now, here is where Patton comes in. George Patton is not involved in the liberation of Paris. Officially, his Third Army is sweeping east and south, racing toward Germany. Paris is not his sector, not his assignment, not his problem. But Patton has never been particularly interested in what is officially his problem. Patton's relationship with authority was, to put it diplomatically, complicated. He had already been nearly destroyed by it, the infamous slapping incident in Sicily in 1943, where he struck 2 hospitalized soldiers he accused of cowardice, had almost ended his career. Eisenhower had kept him sidelined for nearly a year. Patton had watched lesser generals get opportunities that should have been his, and the experience had not made him more patient or more deferential. What it had made him was hungry. By August 1944, Patton is operating with a kind of controlled fury. He is 59 years old. He believes, with the absolute conviction of a man who has studied warfare his entire life, that he is the best offensive commander the Allies have. And he is watching the liberation of Paris unfold with the particular frustration of someone who knows he could do it faster, better, and with more style. But de Gaulle's insistence on French priority has created a specific problem. The 2nd French Armored Division, under Leclerc, is moving toward Paris, but it is moving through terrain that is still contested, and it is moving slowly. By August 24th, Leclerc's lead elements are still outside the city. The resistance fighters inside Paris are sending desperate radio messages. They are running out of ammunition. People are dying in the streets. The American general commanding the sector, Leonard Garrow, is growing furious. He is technically Leclerc's superior officer, and Leclerc is not listening to him. Leclerc is taking orders from de Gaulle, not from the American chain of command. And Patton, watching all of this from his own headquarters, makes a decision. He doesn't ask for permission. He doesn't file a request through proper channels. He simply begins moving American units, specifically elements of the 4th Infantry Division, toward Paris. The reasoning he gives is military. The American units will secure the flanks, protect Leclerc's advance, ensure the operation succeeds. This is technically true. It is also technically a way of inserting American soldiers into an operation that de Gaulle had specifically designed to exclude them from the decisive moment. On the evening of August 24th, a small column of French tanks finally breaks through into Paris. The bells of Notre Dame begin to ring, and within minutes, every church bell in the city joins them. The sound rolls across Paris like a wave. 2 million people hearing in those bells the end of something they had not been certain would ever end. The next morning, the 25th of August, 1944, the liberation of Paris begins in earnest. Leclerc's division pours into the city. Von Choltitz surrenders to French officers. De Gaulle arrives and walks down the Champs-Élysées in one of the most carefully staged acts of political theater in modern history. 2 million people lining the streets, the world watching, France telling its own story of its own resurrection. And American soldiers are there too. The 4th Infantry Division, Patton's insurance policy, moves through Paris alongside the French. They are not the headline. De Gaulle made sure of that. But they are there. And their presence means that if anything had gone wrong, if German resistance had stiffened, if the operation had needed reinforcement, the Americans were already in position. What did Patton actually say when questioned about his decision to move American units toward Paris without explicit authorization? The accounts vary, as they always do with Patton, because Patton understood that the version of a story that gets remembered is the one told with the most conviction. But the essence of his response was characteristically blunt. He was not going to let political considerations get soldiers killed. If the French needed time to stage their entrance, fine. But he was not going to leave American forces sitting on the sideline while a military operation hung in the balance. Whether you read that as insubordination or military wisdom depends entirely on where you're standing. Here's what I find genuinely fascinating about this moment, and what I think gets lost in the drama of it. Patton and de Gaulle were not actually that different. Both men were consumed by questions of national honor and military legacy. Both believed, with an intensity that made them difficult to work with, that they understood something about war and history that the bureaucrats and the cautious generals around them did not. Both were willing to act outside the boundaries of their authority when they believed the situation demanded it. They were, in a very real sense, fighting the same fight from opposite sides. De Gaulle wanted France to own its liberation. Patton wanted America to be indispensable to it. And the city of Paris, ancient and battered and impossibly beautiful, became the stage where those two imperatives collided and somehow, improbably, resolved. What did this moment actually change? Here's where the story gets its real weight. The liberation of Paris on the 25th of August 1944 did not significantly alter the military trajectory of the war. Germany was going to lose. The question was when, not whether. But the liberation of Paris shaped the political landscape of post-war Europe in ways that are still visible today. De Gaulle's carefully orchestrated entrance, French soldiers leading, French flags flying, France telling its own story gave him the legitimacy he needed to prevent France from being occupied by Allied forces after liberation, to resist American pressure on French governance, to build the political movement that would eventually make him President of the Fifth Republic. France emerged from the war as a nation with agency. That was not inevitable. It was the result of one man's furious, relentless insistence on a specific image. French soldiers, French flags, the Champs-Élysées. And Patton? He continued east. His Third Army crossed the Seine, swept through France, entered Germany. He died in December 1945 from injuries sustained in a car accident near Mannheim, Germany, not in battle, as he had always imagined he would, but in a hospital bed, 9 days after the crash, talking about how he wanted to go home. He never wrote a definitive account of the Paris episode. He didn't need to. The record speaks. What's your take on this? Was Patton right to push American forces toward Paris, despite the political arrangement with de Gaulle? Drop your perspective in the comments. I'm genuinely curious whether you see it as military pragmatism or something else entirely. There is a version of this story that frames it as a conflict between two difficult, ego-driven men who nearly complicated a liberation that should have been straightforward. That version is not wrong, exactly, but it misses something. The real story is about what nations need in their darkest moments. France needed to believe it had fought for itself, that it had not simply been rescued like a passive object of someone else's war. Patton, for all his bluster, understood that too, which is why his intervention, when it came, was designed to support rather than supplant. The bells of Notre Dame rang on the evening of August 24th because French soldiers had broken through. But they kept ringing, and Paris did not burn, in part because American soldiers were close enough that burning it would have been pointless. If you want to keep following stories like this, the moments where military history and human ambition collide in ways that actually change the world, joining this channel means being part of a community that takes that seriously. Not casual history, the real thing. The summer of 1944 was full of these moments, decisions made in hours that shaped decades. Men operating at the absolute edge of their authority, their courage, their understanding of what history required of them. De Gaulle walked down the Champs-Élysées on the 25th of August 1944, with the absolute bearing of a man who had never doubted this moment would come even during the years when almost everyone else had. 2 million people watched him and believed, perhaps for the first time in 4 years, that France was still France. Somewhere to the east, Patton was already looking at the next map, already calculating the next advance. Paris was behind him. Germany was ahead. And the argument about who had been right would last for decades. It still hasn't been settled.